Welcome to the 15th session on this study of the book of Genesis. This week we read chapters 45, 46, 47, and 48. Joseph breaks down, weeps, and tells his brothers who he really is. At Pharaoh's urging, the brothers go back to get Jacob and their families. Jacob's family settles in Goshen, where they continue as shepherds. Jacob gives a special blessing to Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. But before all this, we begin with a prayer. O God, our Father, open our eyes and enlighten our minds as we study your word. So grant that our minds may know your truth and our hearts may feel your love, and then confirm and strengthen our wills that we may go out to live what we have learned. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. In the last session, we discussed a possible motive that the redactor may have had for the direction his work took as he pieced together the book of Genesis. Based on the work of Mark Brett, we said that Genesis might be read as resistance literature with the objective of undermining the official government policy of exclusivism as put forth by Ezra and Nehemiah. Today I want to briefly sketch another idea about the redactor's objectives and identity based on Who Wrote the Bible by Richard Elliott Friedman. Friedman suggests that combining J and E with the priestly source P and adding the D source was the work of an Aaronoid priest, that is, a priest who was descended from Aaron, the brother of Moses. The redactor's role was primarily to rearrange texts that had already been written while adding a very small amount of his own original work. He began the first 4 books of the Torah with priestly texts. He used the priestly work as the framework. Most of the texts inserted by the redactor of his own were in the typical language and interests of P. It seems like it could have been a priest that did this. There is evidence that some of the redactor's additions were written during the tabernacle period, that is, after the exile in the Second Temple period. There were no kings during this period. The authorities were the Aaronoid priests. Friedman suggests that this particular Aaronoid priest was a position of authority and likely a scribe. All these characteristics fit Ezra, who is described by Nehemiah as being the individual who brought the Torah to Judah and read from it for the first time in public. Friedman suggests that Ezra was the redactor. Unfortunately, if Ezra was the redactor, that seems to directly contradict Brett's conclusion that the redactor was engaged in attempting to subvert Ezra's policy of exclusivism. It doesn't seem like they can both be right. A lot of what we've discussed about the documentary hypothesis, the 4-source theory about the composition of Genesis, is just that, hypothesis. And much of the work in this area is done by modern scholars is open for debate. There may be strong consensus on the basic hypothesis, but the details of who wrote what, when, and why is continually being contested. So we go on with chapter 45. Chapter 45, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers and sends them home to get their father and their families. Jacob's sojourn to Egypt involves 3 meetings, one with God, one with Joseph, and one with Pharaoh. The first is God's final revelation to Jacob. God had previously forbidden Isaac to go to Egypt during a famine, but his son may now go as part of a divine plan, his people's destiny. The blessing given to Abraham's children is repeated in chapter 46, and God will be with Jacob on this journey as he has been on others. The meeting between father and long-lost son is brief but powerful, returning as it does to the face theme. So we begin chapter 45. We begin with reading verses 1 through 8. And Joseph could no longer hold himself in check before all who stood in attendance upon him, and he cried, "Clear out everyone around me." And no man stood with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians heard, and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed before him. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me, pray." And they came close, and he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be pained, and do not be incensed with yourselves that you sold me down here, because for sustenance God has sent me before you. 2 years now there has been famine in the heart of the land. and there are yet 5 years without plowing and harvest. And God has sent me before you to make you a remnant on earth and to preserve life, for you to be a great surviving group. And so it is not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me father to Pharaoh and lord to all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Joseph weeps uncontrollably and so loudly that he's heard by the Egyptians outside the house and all the way to the palace of Pharaoh. After announcing that he is Joseph, he immediately asks if his father is still alive. We know that he's already asked the brothers whether their father is still alive, but he asked that as an Egyptian viceroy, as an Egyptian governor. He may not entirely trust their earlier answer. He has to repeat his claim a second time. I am Joseph, but adds, whom you sold into Egypt. Is this add-on the last test for his brothers to see how they will respond? What other retribution does he have in mind? He then immediately tries to reassure them. But in his claim that he has recognized God's plan, there is still a hint that Joseph has not lost the sense of his own brilliant initiative in all that he has accomplished. So when he says it's God's plan, he also means Joseph's plan. We go on 9 through 15. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord to all Egypt. Come down to me and do not delay. And you shall dwell in the land of Goshen and shall be close to me, and you and your sons and the sons of your sons and your flocks and your cattle and all that is yours. And I will sustain you there, for yet 5 years of famine remain, lest you lose all, you and your household and all that is yours. And look, your own eyes can see in the eyes of my brother Benjamin that it is my very mouth that speaks to you. And you must tell my father, all my glory in Egypt, and all that you have seen, hurry and bring down my father here. And he fell upon the neck of his brother Benjamin, and he wept. And Benjamin wept on his neck. And he kissed all his brothers, and he wept over them. And after that, his brothers spoke to him. Verse 9 says, thus says your son Joseph. This is what is called the messenger formula, used in biblical Hebrew as a kind of salutation to introduce letters. God has made me lord of all Egypt. The land of Goshen is a region in the Nile Delta close to the border of the Sinai Peninsula. Historically, we know that Semitic nomads from the Sinai were granted permission by the Egyptian government to graze their flocks in this particular region. Verse 12 said, it is my very mouth that speaks to you. Remember, until Joseph cleared the room to let his brothers know who he really was, he was speaking in Egyptian and using an interpreter. Now he is speaking in Hebrew. The brothers are still dumbfounded, so they may not have noticed that. He reminds them here. Only after he weeps and embraces them all are his brothers able to speak. We go on with 16 through 20. And the news was heard in the house of Pharaoh, saying, Joseph's brothers have come, and it was good in Pharaoh's eyes and his servants' eyes. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, this now do, load up your beasts, and go and return to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come back to me, that I may give you the best of the land in Egypt, and you shall live off the fat of the land. And you, charge them, this now do, take you from the land of Egypt wagons for your little ones and for your wives, and convey your father, and come. And regret not your belongings, for the best of all in the land of Egypt is yours. Now Pharaoh has supported Joseph's plan to bring his family to Egypt and offered wagons. We are assuming the best of the land in Egypt is Goshen, which Joseph has already promised them. Although one has to wonder if this is the best land in Egypt, why it's not already occupied. Kind of like God giving Canaan to Abraham, even though it's already occupied by the Canaanites and Perizzites and all the others. Or the English and Spanish governments granting land in America to the colonists, or the U.S. government parceling out land in the western frontier that's already occupied by Native Americans. But I digress. We go on with 21 through 24. And so the sons of Israel did, and Joseph gave them wagons as Pharaoh had ordered, and he gave them supplies for the journey. To all of them, each one, he gave changes of garments. And to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And to his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys conveying from the best of Egypt, and 10 she-asses conveying grain and bread and food for his father for the journey. And he sent off his brothers, and they went. And he said to them, "Do not be perturbed on the journey." The gift of garments is in contrast to Joseph having been stripped of his garment when he was thrown into the pit. The silver awarded to Benjamin is the final gesture of restitution for the 20 pieces of silver the brothers took for the sale of Joseph. By "do not be perturbed," Joseph probably is reassuring his brothers that they shouldn't fear any additional surprise retribution or traps on their journey, like they have the last couple of trips that they tried to make back to Canaan. We go on with 25 through 28. And they went up from Egypt, and they came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father, and they told him, saying, "Joseph is still alive, and that he was the ruler in all the land of Egypt." And his heart stopped, for he did not believe them. And they spoke to him all the words of Joseph that he had spoken to them. And he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to convey him. And the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And Joseph and Israel said, "Enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. Let me go see him before I die." The Hebrew verb here plainly means that Joseph's heart stopped, or precisely intermit. It skipped a beat. He is now worried that his less than trustworthy sons are perpetrating some kind of a cruel hoax on him. But then he sees the wagons, which would have been drawn by oxen, which would indicate they came from Egypt. There are no oxen and no wagons in Canaan. All he seems to have heard is that Joseph is still alive. Jacob is somewhat still self-absorbed, still talking about dying, although he is old. He's no longer the man who wrestled with stones and divine beings, but an old man tottering on the brink of the grave. And he knows that, and he flaunts that. We go on with 1 through 7 of the next chapter, chapter 46. And Israel journeyed onward with all that was his, and he came to Beersheba, and he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God said to Israel through visions of the night, "Jacob, Jacob," he said. "Here I am." And he said, "I am the God of your father. Fear not to go down to Egypt, for a great nation I will make you there. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I myself will surely bring you back up as well, and Joseph shall lay his hand on your eyes." And Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel conveyed Jacob their father and their little ones and their wives in the wagons Pharaoh had sent to convey him. And they took their cattle and their substance that they had got in the land of Canaan. They came to Egypt, Jacob and all his seed with him, his sons and the sons of his sons with him, and the daughters of his sons, and all of his seed he brought with him to Egypt. We hear Jacob, Jacob, followed by "here I am," just like we heard with God calling Abraham in the story of the binding of Isaac. It's like bringing back the good old days. We haven't heard God speaking to anyone for quite some time. There is a stop at Beersheba where his father built an altar to make a sacrifice. We hear the language of the covenantal promise again. God says that I myself will go down with you. In a polyistic view, the power of God was limited to the territorial borders of the God's worshippers. There was a concern during the Babylonian exile, for example, that God was back in Judah in the destroyed temple. Here God says he will be with them in Egypt. We go on with genealogy in 8 through 27. And these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt: Jacob and his sons, Jacob's firstborn Reuben, and the sons of Reuben, Enoch and Palu, and Hezron and Carmi, and the sons of Simeon, Jimel and Jamin and Ohad, and Jakshan and Zohar and Saul, the sons of the Canaanite woman, and the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, The sons of Judah, and Onan, and Shelah, and Perez, and Zerah. And and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And the sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamuel. And the sons of Ishkar, Tola, and Puvah, and Eob, and Shimron. And the sons of Zebulun, Sered, and Elon, and Jahiel. These are the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Padamaran, and also Dinah his daughter, every person of his sons and daughters, 33. And the sons of Gad, Ziphion, and Haggai, Shuhani, and Esbon, and Eri, and Arodi, and Areli. And the sons of Asher, Imnah, and Ishva, and Ishvi, and Beriah, and Sarah their sister. And the sons of Berah, Heber, and Melchiel. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah his daughter, and she bore these to Jacob, 16 persons. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, Joseph, and Benjamin. And to Joseph were born of the land of Egypt, whom Aseneth, daughter of Potphoria, priest of On, bore to him, Manasseh and Ephraim. And the sons of Benjamin, Bela, and Becher, and Ashbel, Gera, and Naaman, Eah, and Rosh, and Muppin, and Huppim, and Ard. These are the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. The sons of Dan, Hushim, and the sons of Naphtali, Jehiel, and Guni, and Jezer, and Shilem. These are the sons of Bilhah, who Laban gave to Rachel his daughter, and she bore these to Jacob, 7 persons in all. All the persons who came with Jacob to Egypt, issue of his loins, aside from the wives of Jacob's sons, 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2 persons. All the persons of the household of Jacob coming to Egypt were 70. Once again, a genealogical list used to close a large narrative unit. In a short genealogy like this one, which compared to the longer lists of Esau's family that we saw in chapter 36. The tales of the patriarchs of the land of Canaan are now concluded. Jacob and his family traveled to Egypt. It is a large family that will ultimately grow into the future tribes of Israel. We note that the total number works out to the magical number of 70. We seem to have included Joseph and his 2 sons and their mother. Whether we count and Onan, who are dead, or the wives of several of the sons and the grandsons is not clear. We mention only a couple of daughters. We can also notice the young, fragile lad Benjamin has 10 sons who go along with him to Egypt. A hint here, don't try to count them. It's best if you just accept the number as 70. 70 is a fullness, a large number, 10 times the sacred 7. Jacob, once a solitary figure, has grown to a grand family, the nucleus of a nation. So we go on with 28 through 34. And Judah he had sent before him to show him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen, and Joseph harnessed his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father in Goshen, and appeared before him and fell on his neck. And he wept upon his neck a long while. And Israel said to Joseph, I may die now after seeing your face, for you are still alive. And Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, Let me go up and tell Pharaoh, and let me say to him, My brothers and my father's household that was in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for they have always been handlers of livestock, and the sheep and the cattle and all that is theirs they have brought. And so when Pharaoh calls for you and says, What is it you do? You should say, Your servants have been handlers of livestock from our youth until now, we and our fathers as well, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is abhorrent to Egypt. Jacob has chosen Judah as a guide for the rest of the family. Joseph's chariot and the wagons highlight the differences between Egypt and Canaan, where it says Joseph appeared before him. This is more typical, the phrase that would be used for God to appear before someone. Maybe for Jacob, the appearance of this Egyptian governor pulling up in this chariot that you don't see in Canaan would have been like seeing a god. This last section is kind of strange. We have heard that the Egyptians didn't eat lamb, but they did use wool. Shepherding was historically not taboo in Egypt. Perhaps it was just the issue that the Egyptians considered semi-nomadic herdsmen from the north to be inferior. Egyptians were mostly agriculturists and urbanites, much more sophisticated than nomadic herdsmen. So we go on to chapter number 47. And we start with verse 1 through 6. And Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, My father and my brothers and their flocks and their cattle and all that is theirs have come from the land of Canaan. And here they are in the land of Goshen. And from the pick of his brothers he took 5 men and presented them to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to his brothers, What is it you do? And they said to Pharaoh, Your servants are shepherds, we and our fathers as well. And they said to Pharaoh, We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, because the famine is grave in the land of Canaan. And so let your servants pray, dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, saying, Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know there are able men among them, and make them masters of the livestock over what is mine. And Jacob and his sons had come to Egypt, to Joseph, and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, heard. Joseph wants to introduce the most presentable of his brothers to Pharaoh, so he picks 5. The brothers tell Pharaoh that they came to sojourn in the land. They're, after all, nomadic, but they end up saying they want to dwell in the land, a more permanent residence. Verses 5 and 6 have been restructured slightly by alter, so that the story is more coherent and closer to the Septuagint than the Masoretic text, so it may sound different a little bit than what your translation is, depending on which translation you're using. We go on with 7 through 10. And Joseph brought Jacob his father and stood him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Jacob, How many are the days of the years of your life? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days and years of my life, and they have not attained the days and the years of my fathers in the days of sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from Pharaoh's presence. Jacob's summary of his life is a kind of a complex solemnity. He has achieved everything he aspired to achieve, but he doesn't get everything he wanted in the way that he wanted it. He fought with his brother. He got Rachel, but had to take Leah as well. He lost Rachel in childbirth. He is blessed by God and has a new name, but was permanently wounded in the process. He spends over 20 years grieving over his favorite son, only to find the son alive as he is in his old age. He achieved what he wanted, but not the way he wanted it. When Jacob talks of the days of his sojournings, he means both that he has had a wandering life, not staying in one place, but also that human existence is by nature a sojourning, a temporary existence. We go on with 11 through 15. And Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a holding in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, and in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread down to the mouths of the little ones. And there was no bread in all the earth, for the famine was very grave in the land of Egypt, and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph collected all the silver to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in return for the provisions they were buying. And Joseph brought the silver to the house of Pharaoh. And the silver of the land of Egypt and of the land of Canaan ran out. And all Egypt came to Joseph, saying, Let us have bread, for why should we die before your eyes? For the silver is gone. Ramses mentioned here is a synonym for Goshen. It could also be an anachronism because Ramses is the city later built with the Israelite slave labor. We remember in Joseph's original plan that he proposed to Pharaoh back in chapter 41, Pharaoh's governor would take a percentage of the crop for the 7 years of plenty. Some translators say as much as 1/5, 20% he would take. Then he would sell it during the years of famine. Pharaoh and his governor are reaping the rewards of that strategy of what some might call pure theft. After a few years of famine, Pharaoh has all the money and all the silver and all the remaining grain. We go 16 through 21. And Joseph said, "Let me have your livestock, that I may give you in return for your livestock if the silver is gone." And they brought their livestock to Joseph, and he gave them bread in return for the horses and stocks of sheep and for the stocks of cattle and the donkeys. And he carried them forward with bread in return for all their livestock that year. And that year ran out, and they came to him the next year and said to him, shall not conceal from my lord that the silver has run out, and the animal stocks are my lord's. Nothing is left for our lord but our carcasses and our farmland. Why should we die before your eyes? Both we and our farmland take possession of us, and our farmland in return for bread, and we with our farmland will be slaves to Pharaoh, and give us seed that we may live and not die, and that farmland not turn to desert. And Joseph took possession of all the farmland of Egypt for Pharaoh, for each Egyptian sold his field, as the famine was harsh upon them. And the land became Pharaoh's, and the people he moved town by town from one end of the border of Egypt to the other. Again, we hear, why should we die before your eyes? The Egyptians have nothing left. No silver, no livestock, nothing but farmland, which is not currently producing any crops. The reduction of the entire Egyptian population to serfdom was meant not to show how ruthless Joseph was, but to demonstrate his brilliance. This story is meant to explain how the Egyptian peasantry became almost totally subordinate to the central government. Without seed to plant, the farmland would return to desert. So Joseph moved the farmers from land that they used to own to land owned by Pharaoh so that they could work Pharaoh's farms. Eventually, Pharaoh would own all the land, or nearly all the land, that is, except for the priests. We go on with 22 and 26 to 26. Only the farmland of the priests he did not take in possession, for all the priests had a fixed allotment from Pharaoh, and they ate from their allotment that Pharaoh had given them. Therefore they did not sell their farmland. And Joseph said to the people, "Look, I have taken possession of you this day with your farmland for Pharaoh. Here is seed for you, and sow the land. And when the harvest come, you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be yours for seeding in the field and for your food, and for those in your household, for those little ones to eat." And they said, "You have kept us alive. May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord in being Pharaoh's slaves." And Joseph made it a fixed law to this very day over the farmland of Egypt, that Pharaoh should have a fifth. Only the farmland of the priests, it alone, did not become Pharaoh's. Egypt's centralization of power, which was so unlike tribal Israel and Canaan, must have astounded and probably troubled the Hebrew writer who wrote this narrative. It was completely different than anything they'd seen in Canaan prior to this. We go on with 27 through 31 through the end of the chapter. And Israel dwelled in the land of Egypt and the land of Goshen, and they took holdings in it, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. And Jacob's days, the years of his life, were 147 years. And Israel's time to die drew near. And he called for his son, for Joseph, and he said to him, "If, pray, I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand, pray, under my thigh, and act toward me with steadfast kindness. Pray, do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, carry me from Egypt, and bury me in their burial place." And he said, "I will do as you have spoken." And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him, and Israel bowed at the head of the bed. Verse 28 says, "And Jacob lived in the land 17 years. There's a symmetry with the 17 years Joseph lived in Canaan before he was sold into slavery in Egypt. As far back as the Middle Ages, David Kimhi wrote, "Just as Joseph was in the lap of Jacob 17 years, Jacob was in the lap of Joseph 17 years." We go on with chapter 48, verse 1 through 6. "And it happened after these things that someone said to Joseph, 'Look, your father is ill,' and he took his 2 sons with him, Manasseh and Ephraim. And someone told Jacob and said, 'Look, your son Joseph is coming to you.' And Israel summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessed me, and said to me, I am about to make you fruitful and multiply you, and make you an assembly of peoples. And I will give this land to your seed after you as an everlasting holding. And so now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came to you in Egypt, shall be mine, Ephraim and Manasseh, like Reuben and Simeon shall be mine. And those you begot after them shall be yours. By their brothers' names they shall be called in their inheritance. Joseph seems to be expecting some sort of special eminence from his father on his sons, which is one explanation for why he took them with him. It mentions Luz. If you remember, Luz was the name of the place before Jacob named it Bethel when he had his first dream vision. The language that Jacob uses is full of thematic and legal implications. Your 2 sons shall be mine, Ephraim and Manasseh, like Reuben and Simeon are mine. He is saying that Joseph's 2 sons will have as good or better an inheritance as his first and second-born sons. He is invoking the Genesis theme of reversal of the firstborn rule. Simeon and Levi were responsible for the massacre at Shechem, and Reuben had violated Jacob's concubine, so perhaps they are deemed unworthy to be the undisputed first and second in line. The language Jacob uses is also the language of formal adoption. Manasseh and Ephraim will become tribes, just as if they were the sons of Jacob. We go on with 7 through 16. As for me, when I was coming from Paddan, Rachel died to my grief in the land of Canaan on the way, still some distance from Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way. Ephrath is Bethlehem. And Israel saw Joseph's sons, and he said, Who are these? And Joseph said to his father, They are my sons whom God has given me here. And he said, Fetch them, pray to me that I may bless them. And Israel's eyes had grown heavy with age, and he could not see. And he brought them near him, and he kissed them, and he embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I had not thought to see your face, and look, God has also let me see your seed. And Joseph drew them out from his knees, and he bowed his face to the ground. And Joseph took the 2 of them, Ephraim with his right hand to Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand to Israel's right, and brought them near him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and placed it on Ephraim's head, and he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, and he crossed his hands, though Manasseh was firstborn, and he blessed them, and he said, The God in whose presence my father walked, Abraham and Isaac, the God who has looked after me all my life till this day, the messenger rescuing me from all evil, may he bless the lads. Let my name be called in them, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. Let them teem multitudinous in the midst of the earth. So, the somewhat strange story that Jacob tells about his return from Paddan when Rachel died in childbirth is significant because it seems to be a loss he never got over. With her death leaving only 2 sons comes his impulse to add 2 of her grandsons to compensate symbolically and legally for the sons she did not live to bear. When Jacob asks, Who are these? He may have difficulty seeing them, or it may just be a question like that's asked in baptism, what name is given this child? He understands he has crossed his hands and he knows what he's doing here. We go on with 17 through 20. And Joseph saw that his father had placed his right hand on Ephraim's head, and it was wrong in his eyes. And he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. And his father refused, and he said, I know, my son, I know. He too shall become a people, and he too shall be great, but his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall be a fullness of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, By you shall Israel bless, saying, May God set you as Ephraim and Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. So after hearing Joseph's objections, Jacob again reaffirms his blessing. He did what he intended to do. When the future people of Israel want to invoke a blessing, they will do it by reciting these very words. May God set you as Ephraim and Manasseh. We go on with 21 through 22 through the end of the chapter. And Israel said to Joseph, look, I'm about to die, but God shall be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. As for me, I have given you with single intent over your brothers what I took from the hand of the Amorite, with my sword and with my bow. Jacob, near to death, has blessed his grandsons in moving terms, bringing full circle many of the key events of his life. Elder and younger sons are switched by the blind patriarch, who this time, though, is one who is fully aware of their identities. As in both literature and life, a dying man sees both past and future with great clarity, as in a vision. Next week, at dying, Jacob addresses his sons, not as they are, but as they will be. We will have the funeral of Jacob, Israel. Our narratives seem to resolve two of the great issues that have persisted throughout our story: sibling hatred and the threat to generational community. We close out the book of Genesis, chapters 49 and 50. Until then, be safe, and I hope to see you Wednesday.